Welcome to the third episode of Switching Screens. I'm Anthony Doyle. With me, as always, Joshua Howe. Today we have Lucas Hann and Robert Flom, who are from the 213 Hoops LA Clippers blog. And we're going to talk about Kawhi Leonard. We're going to talk about the Clippers. We're going to go into a lot of stuff about the Clippers season, the free agency, and towards the end we're going to touch on a little bit of their new blog and some of the stuff that happened with Vox Media recently, with California bloggers. But we'll get started with just like general Clippers stuff. How are you guys feeling about the season so far?
Rob?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's been fun to watch Kawhi Leonard and Paul George as Clippers. That's pretty cool. As I'm sure Anthony and Josh can speak to, watching Kawhi play for your favorite team is pretty fun. The guy is good at basketball. I will say that, with raised expectations can come, a little bit of lessening of joy sometimes. And I think this Clippers team and the Clippers season in general has had a little bit of that. Fans have been notably more upset and, trade talky and, critical of Doc and all this other stuff that we didn't really get a lot the past couple of years. And the Clippers teams themselves they've had nights where they don't look like they're playing too hard or like they care all that much. And that's something that Clippers fans have not been used to the past couple of years when they had like these scrappy underdog teams. So it's been fun, and certainly the Clippers have been really, really good. But it maybe hasn't been quite as fun as I think some Clippers fans have hoped.
Yeah, I think, the Clippers are doing what they should be doing, right? They're keeping guys on low minutes. They're resting Kawhi back-to-backs. They're not showing their full hand. And it comes down to they're not trying to win games as hard as they were trying to win games last year when they basically just needed to go all out every night to try to win, 40-something games to make the playoffs. This year the Clippers know where they're going to be at the end of the regular season, and they're trying to get there healthy. So the foot is not on the gas pedal, and it makes sense. It's not something that I think is like something to complain about or critique the coaching for, but it's definitely something that I think the average fan watching the games can kind of feel, and I think it's created a little bit of discontent among the fans that Rob and I interact with a lot, like on Twitter or on the blog.
Yeah, I think we can definitely relate to that. Last year was as fun as it was with Kawhi. It was stressful, especially with I think it might be a little different for you guys, but with us, with the free agency coming up and there was a lot of how does this win or loss impact his free agency every single night, but also just the expectations of being that top team. And the Clippers have been good before with the Chris Paul, Blake Griffin teams, but I don't know if they've ever had like this kind of expectations. Was it the same with those teams, or is this a little bit more?
I think it's more now because I feel like there was this sense with the Lob City teams, like until the day that you woke up and the Clippers had traded Chris Paul, I just didn't feel like a lot of pressure that like, oh, Blake or Chris is going to leave. It wasn't something that I feel like was talked about. But I think, especially because of, first of all, just the way that the star transactions have gone in the NBA in recent years, but also how rumors and movement have followed Kawhi and PG in recent years, there's very much this feeling like, okay, the Clippers have 2 years before one of these guys, or before both of these guys have player options to potentially leave, so they have to win a championship in the next 2 years or risk losing both of them. And because of the way that we've seen teams try to trade guys a year out rather than lose them, that kind of means that if the Clippers, I don't think the Clippers need to win the championship this year to run it back next year, but let's say the Clippers lose in the second round, and you think, oh wow, we're actually we weren't just one bounce away, right? Like Milwaukee was in the Eastern Conference Finals last year, but the Clippers need to actually do something and get better if they want to compete for a championship in year 2 of this experiment. Then maybe you think, well, maybe we flip Paul George now and shake things up. So I think there's a lot of pressure on this team this year to hopefully win a championship, but at least show that they are right there. If things break a little bit different next year, they could win the championship.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think, like Lucas said, one of the big complaints about Lob City was that they got stale and that the core of the team didn't change for a number of years. It was Blake, CP, DJ for 6 years. Jamal was there for 5, and JJ Redick was there for 4. And a lot of the rest of the team shifted around, but those guys were always there. And really, outside of ridiculous trade rumors, which would come down the pipeline every once in a while, like Blake for Carmelo Anthony, or DJ for whoever people thought was a better center or whatever. There was never really that big a sense that those guys were going to leave. But yeah, I mean, I think Kawhi in particular is somebody that Clippers fans are worried about. Paul George, is a bit more emotive and has spoken repeatedly about how much he likes playing in LA and for the Clippers. You don't really get that with Kawhi Leonard. And I think it doesn't have quite the same pressure as the Raptors had last year. Where it was his free agency was coming up, and the Lakers and Clippers were looming. But I think there's still the sense that like every time like a teammate misses an open shot or Lou Williams blows a defensive assignment, it's like like Kawhi might be taking note of these things. Like the Clippers might not be as good as he wanted or thought. And like there could be better options out there. So I think that pressure is definitely still there. And that's been a part of the season and why maybe it hasn't been, as fun and certainly has been very stressful as well.
I wonder if some of this stuff speaks to the president of the NBA in general, but I mean, there's a lot of like, and you're talking about this, and there was this certainly the Raptors last year, but there was a lot of lack of enjoying the present moment, and I think a lot of people had to were constantly saying it, the people that were trying to live in the moment had to remind other people because there's such a focus on the future all the time. And where are these guys going next and where are they, they just got there. Like the Raptors just landed Kawhi and there's a lot of massa, coming out and saying like hold on, like we're still, we're still in the process here. The same with Nick Nurse as rookie head coach saying, well, like, asking him these questions and he's saying, I don't know, look, this is my first time going around with this team. And, now Paul George and Kawhi just got to the Clippers, and people are already concerned about that as well. And it seems to be one of the larger issues, I think, surrounding the league is rather than just enjoying, what's presently happening in basketball on the floor, people are already looking forward to the next thing and where could it be going in the rumor mill. And it kind of, I think that's part of the joylessness maybe that you were talking to earlier.
I always think of like the morning after Game 6 of Raptors-Bucks. I turned on the ESPN morning shows the day after, and the stories they led with were, how does this affect Kawhi's free agency, and how does this affect Giannis and the Bucks? It was like they just finished this really great basketball series, and nobody was talking about the basketball that had been played.
Yeah.
Like with the Clippers this year, the times that I've watched them, it feels like there's a lot of the same reactions. Like I watched both of the Bucks games, I watched both of the Lakers games, and it felt like a lot of the reactions afterwards were, how does this affect the future instead of talking about the basketball that was just played.
There's a lot of that. And they're really, really good. And like it's the same thing with the Lakers. People are talking about Anthony Davis too, right? Like, and it's a little weird to me that that's such a focus when these teams are on the floor, the actual product they're putting out is fun and cool and entertaining to watch. And I do think the Clippers in particular, like, I really do relate to the season meetings and this fun as rooting for the underdog team. Like the Raptors had the best year of DeMar DeRozan's career up to that point, prior to him getting traded for Kawhi, obviously, and that was really cool to see. Obviously, to have a guy do that didn't have around for so long, and then they traded him for Kawhi, and that's the whole thing. But it's a completely different feeling, and then you throw in the Raptors were injured that whole year. It just took away a lot of stuff, low management, game viral, and all this stuff. And you can kind of see it a little differently, but you can see it with the Clippers as well. That like Kawhi's obviously still doing low management. There was talk about he wasn't going to do it there, or he wasn't planning on doing it, and he is still doing it, which makes sense. He has a degenerative injury, so you want to keep him as healthy as possible. But yeah, like it makes sense. Like it's not easy for a marathon like 82 games to get used to. What you're really looking forward to is the playoff run, and that's when those guys I think are going to shine. So I expect the Clippers to have like an awesome, really fun postseason run with those guys.
Yeah, I think it's, to an extent, like the NBA has become a very transaction-driven league. Partially because the regular season is so stagnant, right? But then the transactions are just like so fun. Also, like the trade. I mean, we probably all know because of the work that we do. Like people are most interested in reading about basketball like the first week of July and the second week of February, right? Like free agency and the trade deadline is the most. I mean, I'll get more people reading my articles or listening to my podcasts during free agency than I will during a playoff series, because that's when people are really tuned in, right? People, it's like fans and people around the league. But I do think that there's a balance that needs to be struck. Like, I mean, what you're saying, Anthony, like, the day after Game 6, when there was just this like phenomenal, like classic game played, well, maybe we should like talk about the game because that, like actually living that moment. But it just seems like, I think it's become the way that transaction coverage can actually be really like invigorating for a lot of fans and get them excited about stuff. I think we've kind of passed that tipping point into getting fans exhausted, where now like we're talking about Karl Anthony Towns like 4 years out from his contract ending, and it's just like small market fans are just like exhausted with the state of coverage, I think. And so yeah, I do think that people who are like, we should only talk about the games. I disagree. I enjoy talking about trades. I enjoy talking about free agency and fake moves and all this hypothetical stuff. And I think that that's kind of the lifeblood of the NBA blog economy, if you will, this sort of speculative stuff. But I also think that we've kind of passed the tipping point on these sort of, and it's also reached so much of mainstream coverage too, like those, ESPN talk shows throwing out like crazy hypothetical deals. And yeah, I think there should be probably a little more talk about the basketball.
On the transaction side of things, though, like one thing that I did find interesting about Kawhi is, like, he chose the Clippers, and this was something I wanted to talk to you guys about. Is there hadn't really been a guy before Kawhi who had the Lakers as an option, who had the Lakers actively courting him like that, who chose the Clippers, and as Raptors fans, when the Kawhi trade happened, we kind of felt, I know a lot of Raptors fans felt like we were sort of a little brother team in the NBA too. We were a team that was good, but we kept losing to LeBron, and we were never going to really reach that level. And then Kawhi came, and I think there's a little bit of like a kindred spirit nature between Raptors and Clippers fans with that stuff, because I got the sense talking to Clippers people that they, until that happened, they kind of felt the same way, that you lived in the Lakers' shadow. And then Kawhi did something really unexpected. Because as much as, Woj and people like that were talking about the Clippers escorting Kawhi, it still felt like it was probably more the Lakers until it happened.
Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely get the sense that the Clippers have always been the Lakers' shadow, and for big free agency stuff in particular, it's always like, until a guy's a Clipper, they're not a Clipper. It's the exact opposite of Lakers fans who, every single guy in the NBA is going to the Lakers, wants to go to the Lakers. I think the NBA would be better off without the Lakers. This is my hot take. Send them to the moon. No, I mean, I think with Kawhi in particular, it's interesting because I actually was not as worried about the Lakers. I know Lucas might speak on this a little bit more. He has a few more connects inside the organization. But I think there's kind of been, not necessarily a cover story, but I think the Clippers were more confident about Kawhi than they've let on since then. I think that the stuff about them needing Paul George, maybe it's true. I don't know. I'm not in Kawhi Leonard's, inner camp, of course. But I think that Kawhi always wanted to go to the Clippers, and I think they were always his first choice. And I think, I wrote an article, I think the day of or the day before Kawhi made his decision. I think it was a Friday evening, and I wrote it Friday morning about different, superstars the Clippers could try to target to bring in Kawhi. And my thinking was that, all the information was set, and he was waiting on something. And what that something was could really only be some kind of shifting trade. And the only team that could really make that trade was the Clippers. So I think the Clippers were always his priority. Now, whether he would have ever chosen them if they hadn't made not the Paul George move, but any move, is impossible to say unless, years from now, Kawhi himself comes out and says it. My personal thinking is that he would have chosen the Clippers anyway. I do not think he wanted to play with LeBron James. And Anthony Davis, I don't think it's necessarily, like, oh, Kawhi wanted, like, the scrappy underdog team, he didn't want to make a super team. But I do think he wanted to carve his own lane a little bit. And I do think, just him and LeBron in the same team might just not have been good for his brand, even. Even being on the Lakers, in LA, he would have been second fiddle to LeBron, and honestly, probably even behind Anthony Davis, who's younger, plays a more exciting brand of basketball, some would say. So I actually was kind of always a little more worried about him going back to Toronto than to the Lakers, to be honest. But it was definitely still, until he was actually on the Clippers, and Haynes made that tweet, I still was never entirely sure. But I do think Kawhi was kind of unique in that regard.
Yeah, and I think you think about what Kawhi, kind of requires in terms of load management, and what that means for the roster that you have around him. And you look at what the Lakers are in a situation right now where they took that $30 million that they would have spent on Kawhi and went and signed like 6 other guys, and they still need to play LeBron and Anthony Davis hobbled every night. Big minutes, rely on them. Like, there's these side-by-side graphics. Oh, the Lakers star duo scores more than the Clippers star duo. Like, yeah, they also, like, play a bunch more minutes and take a bunch more shots and don't have Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell, right? So I think Kawhi, and this was maybe the factor that made me feel best about not being too worried about the Lakers, is knowing that if Kawhi went there, every time that he sits on a back-to-back, or every time that he plays, 32 minutes, and like doesn't push himself to 36 in a given night, like those are minutes, those are games that like someone from the D League is playing, and that it sets the team back. Obviously missing Kawhi sets the Clippers back too when he's sitting out, but the Clippers are in a situation where they've got like, first of all, now Paul George, who is another star wing that fills in, but also Mo Harkless, who was a starter on some really good Portland teams. Rodney McGruder, who was a starter in Miami last year, coming off the bench at small forward. Right? So the Clippers are in a position to still be solid when Kawhi is out. The Lakers, I don't think, would have been in that position. And I think that was probably a big factor for him, as much as this whole branding, carve my own lane thing. It's been really interesting for me with the new year coming and all of these like top decade teams coming out, and Kawhi being kind of left off of a lot of the top decade teams, despite winning 2 of the 10 Finals MVPs in that 10-year window. And I think that sort of speaks to, for him, he's a guy that has won 2 of the last 10 Finals MVPs and has every intention on winning, 1 or 2 more at least. And I do think that maybe in the broad conception, for personality reasons, for excitement reasons, whatever it is, Anthony Davis is a guy that, I think he would not have been the guy for the Lakers. I think I think that matters a little bit.
I got a lot of Lakers fans mad at me during that all-decade team conversation because I said that Anthony Davis should not have been over Kawhi Leonard on those.
He didn't win anything this decade.
He's a great basketball player. He didn't matter. Kawhi mattered. And what Rob said about the load management, the other thing about Kawhi is it's not just the nights that he doesn't play. It's because of his knee condition, there are nights when he plays and he doesn't have it.
Yeah.
And, I mean, Kawhi's legacy is so weird to me whenever it comes up, because he's still 27, but we do talk about legacy because he's got 2 Finals MVPs, and clearly he can be, like, the best player in the world on a given night. But then also, like, he's probably never going to play 70 games in a season again. We don't know how long he's got before this knee condition gets worse. And so the longevity argument really works against him the more he has to do. And I agree with what you said about the Lakers because of that, and that was a point that mattered to me. But also, the legacy thing, I kind of wonder about that one because I have a theory that might have been part of what led to the rift with San Antonio. Is in San Antonio, before everything went wrong, there was a lot of perception that Kawhi was just going to step in and be the next face of the franchise in the line of David Robinson and Tim Duncan, and that he was just going to fill those shoes. And in Toronto, he got to write his own legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And with the Lakers, it would have been, well, he's expected to step in line and fill the shoes of Kobe and Shaq and Magic. But with the Clippers, he again gets to write his own legacy. And I think that's really attractive for some guys.
Yeah, it's literally the Knicks' hope that they're going to land Massa, right? Because, like, he's done everything else, bring him in to fix a trash franchise that no one else has been able to fix, and all of a sudden he's a legend forever in one of the biggest basketball markets anywhere. I have the same feeling about Kawhi, that, like, when he first came to Toronto, there was a lot of talk, and obviously not all of it was from Kawhi, but there was a definitive statement from him right away that health is one of the few big things that really matters to him. That he wanted to be able to play as long as he could play. He wanted to be healthy. He didn't want to end his career in pain. I remember him having conversations about that's really important to him. And I think a lot of Raptors fans were hanging on to the fact that Alex McKechnie is so very good at his job that would be a big reason as to why Kawhi would resign. And I feel like that's also part of the reason he chose the Clippers, because, like Lucas was saying, they're really the only team, especially at the time, that could actually emulate the load management strategy pretty much the same. Like, there was no way the Lakers could do it. He was going to have to play for them, and if he didn't, then they were going to lose games. There was no way that was going to happen. And I always felt like the Raptors were in the driver's seat to re-sign Kawhi because of the reason that I didn't think the Clippers would be able to make the move for the second guy. I thought that was going to be the thing that would be able to bring Kawhi home, and at some point, I thought, I don't know who it is. I don't know who they're going to be able to land. And then they pulled out a trade that, I think surprised most everybody. And at that point, it was, okay, there it is. This is kind of what he was waiting for. And, when he came back to Toronto, he did say that he gave, a big consideration to re-signing here. And I do believe that. I think the pitch that they gave would have been, a good one and whatever, but clearly, like, he wanted to go home, and I think that was always an underlying tension. I think the whole season he was here, that, he is a guy who, that was on his mind before he came to Toronto, and he did, obviously, everything he could for Toronto, and they won a title, so there should be no hard feelings at all, but, he ended up back home, and it's kind of good, because I think he's in the best possible situation he could have been, especially with the Clippers managing to pull out such an amazing trade at landing Paul George.
Yeah, I think on that point of getting Paul George, kind of looking for that second star, that pretty much for me, covering the team, those like 2 weeks, the week before free agency and then that week while we were waiting for Kawhi's decision, that was just like me frantically all day trying to figure out, like, what are they going to do, right? Because if I can know what they're going to do and I can say, hey, this is how the Clippers can do it, and then they do it, that's great, right? And so I'm doing all this stuff on my own, and I'm also having all these conversations. And at one point, someone did bring up that there had been a conversation with Paul George to me. And I think I said to you, Robert, I was like, hey, just so you know, someone told me that there was a conversation with Paul George. I don't really buy it. It just doesn't track to me, right? You just finished third in MVP voting. So you're buying, like, Paul George is a guy who I think, in a vacuum, I'm probably a little lower on average, but he just finished third in MVP voting, right? So it's definitely, like, buying high on a guy like Paul George at like, peak value. And I was like, there's no reason for, I was thinking, like, okay, well, maybe, like, the Clippers could put together a big offer for Bradley Beal, right? Like, Washington's in a rebuilding state. But there's no reason for Oklahoma City to do it. It just doesn't make sense. But it did come down to basically Kawhi talking to Paul separately and having Paul go to Sam Presti in Oklahoma City and ask, I want to go to the Clippers. And I think that goes back to Robert's earlier point that I think Kawhi wanted to be with the Clippers all along, which means it's possible in my mind that he would have ended up signing with the Clippers anyway because it's clearly what he wanted. Because even before free agency, right, we know that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving to Brooklyn was long predetermined, but in the days before free agency opened, Kawhi was on the phone with Kevin Durant trying to convince him to come to the Clippers instead. So the fact that Kawhi was, even before he made his decision, doing all of this recruiting kind of speaks to the Clippers are where, in his mind, he really wanted to end up. And I think if he had gone back to Toronto, I'm not sure the Lakers, I think he took the meeting with the Lakers because you have to. The LeBron's there, AD is there, they have the max slot. But I think if he'd gone back to Toronto, it would have been I feel like I have to. You know what I mean? And I think, so that's why I think even if the Clippers hadn't made the Paul George trade, I'm not going to say the Clippers still would have landed Kawhi, but I think that it would have still maybe been a coin flip at that point.
I kind of think he might have been using the Raptors and Lakers as leverage to get the Paul George trade to happen, to say to the Clippers, like, if you guys need to do this, or I'm considering other options. Whether or not he was actually considering those other options. When I think about like the Lakers stuff that was in the news a week or two ago about him asking, or Uncle Dennis asking for part ownership in a house and stuff like that, people made a big deal out of that. I honestly think maybe they did ask for that, but I don't think they asked for that because they wanted it. I think they asked for that because they wanted to have demands that the Lakers would at least hesitate before meeting, that would keep the Lakers on the line, but also keep the Clippers thinking, okay, well, he has other options that he's thinking
about. I absolutely agree with that. I mean, I think, he clearly wanted another superstar. And again, we will never know unless he says whether that was definitive for him or not. But I think the putting the pressure on the Clippers, makes a lot of sense because Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is somebody who most Clippers fans thought would be a Clipper for the next decade. This is a guy who not only fans loved, but the organization loved. They started him, I think, 9 games into the season last year. He started the rest of the season. They thought he was going to be maybe not a superstar, but a star and a very versatile player who could fit alongside almost any kind of roster. And that player is invaluable in today's NBA. And, getting the Clippers to move him in a deal for anybody, I think, they needed to have real pressure that, like, look, if you don't make this deal and, maybe Shai was the giving point, maybe it was a couple of those extra firsts, but to try to get, the Clippers to make the final step and go after Paul George is, I think, a very valid point. And, yeah, I mean, I think, Kawhi and Uncle Dennis were doing some negotiating tactics, and I completely agree. I mean, all the stuff about all the Lakers fans were so upset about, Ballmer's doing illegal stuff, and Kawhi is getting ownership shares. It's the league already conducted an investigation and didn't find anything, and I just don't think the Clippers would do that. And again, it's kind of like with the NBA rigs the lottery type of thing where the risk is so vast that the reward just can't possibly be worth it. I mean, if the Clippers did some super under the deal thing with Kawhi, skirting NBA rules, the consequences could be catastrophic. And just stuff like that I just never think happens. And I don't think it happened. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was very savvy negotiating, and Kawhi got what he wanted. I mean, he clearly wanted to play with Paul George. They've mentioned, at their introductory press conference, I was there, that they've wanted to play together basically since they were drafted. And now they have, and, I think they're both enjoying it. Paul George said as much a few days ago that they really are enjoying playing with one another. And which is a good sign for the Clippers, because they have both of them, and they have the ability to pay both of them a vast amount of money in 2 years. And, you know, as long as they are enjoying playing with one another and, you know, again, like Lucas said at the very beginning, you know, I think as long as they make a pretty good playoff run, I don't think they need to win the championship. But if they make the Western Conference Finals and have a good series there or make the NBA Finals, I think that, you know, could definitely be enough to keep this thing riding for, you know, at least one more year, if not longer.
Yeah, I think that this whole Lakers Clippers cheated blah 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 conversation is like, honestly, for me it's kind of boring. Like, the Lakers are whining, right? It's like this whole entitlement spin machine thing happens every time that they don't get what they want. It's all fabricated. It's the reason why it gets perpetuated because the Lakers have such a strong like local talk radio base, and like every local news sports anchor is,
Yeah, but
you know,
the Clippers have all of ESPN's NBA people on the payroll, right?
right. Yeah. Yeah, but so I think that conversation is a little boring. What I think is interesting, I don't want to necessarily derail us, but is not what happened during that week when the Clippers were courting Kawhi and he was asking for the PG trade. But I think it's interesting to ask, was that like, was Kawhi right? Like, should he have made the Clippers make that trade?
That's a really interesting conversation with this season that Shea has had.
And I think also going back to what I said about like the Clippers had to buy, they got in on Paul George basically at the peak of his value, like during his career when he had just finished third in MVP voting, and they did it in a time when Oklahoma City basically had the Clippers up in a corner, like knowing that they had to get the deal done to get Kawhi. And I wonder if, you know, if Kawhi comes on the same contract but the Clippers don't make the trade, if you look at the on-off numbers, the Clippers with Kawhi and PG versus with just Kawhi are like the same, and then with just PG versus with neither of them are like the same, right? So this is not saying that Paul George is not helping the Clippers win basketball games, but he's not having a absurdly huge impact on whether they're winning more games or not. So they might be around the same level of team without that trade, but with the flexibility to then go get a second guy at some point without needing to give up Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, right? And
When I look at the Clippers right now, the one thing that I see that I think they could really use to improve their ceiling is a real. I think they could use a real point guard. Because I think sometimes when they play really good defensive teams that can put more pressure on Kawhi, there just aren't a lot of. There's good passers on the team. There aren't natural passers on the Clippers.
and they don't have a system. They don't run anything.
It's a lot of pick and roll. I was curious about like Kawhi. So like the Raptors fans, I think a lot of them had watched Kawhi super closely before last season because he was in the West for all of his career to that point, and he was a shock to the system.
Sorry about that.
Joining. It's a shock to the system to having a player on your team that's an elite player, right? But when a player is so good at pretty much everything, their slight weaknesses, I guess if you want to put it that way, they stand out a lot more. So Kawhi's playmaking when he was in Toronto was clearly his his weakest element of his game. I mean, teams would send traps at him all the time, and some games he was okay at passing out of them, and others he turned the ball over a lot because it's just not the best part of his game. And there were times also where he'd make passes where you could see that he could see the pass, he just couldn't quite get it there. And obviously with the Clippers, this is something that they've specifically because they don't have, like Anthony is saying, that sort of natural point guard. They're using him more in those situations to be the playmaker, to be the guy handling the pick and roll. And I'm just curious, as you guys obviously are watching him a lot more this season than I am. Does he look a lot more comfortable in those playmaking positions? Like, does he look like he's an above average playmaker? And like, is that something you think is going to be more sustainable when you're in a 7-game series and you're not just seeing different teams every night? And he's able to kind of just get in there with like somebody like a Montrezl Harrell who is a good pick and roll player.
Yeah, I think that Kawhi has actually been sort of surprising in how comfortable he has been in those situations with the Clippers. He's had a lot of big assist nights. Like I think I don't have any numbers off the top of my head, but I think he's kind of like blown his career bests for like, you know, how many games in a row with at least 5 assists, that, like things like that. He's really kind of exceeded what expectations would be for him in that capacity. I think the bigger problem, as opposed to his comfort level making those plays, is sort of he doesn't seem. Maybe he can create he can create offense for others and he can make plays for others, but he doesn't quite see the whole flow of the game, right? In the way that like someone like Chris Paul, when he was on the Clippers, is controlling every possession and he knows how the game is going. Kawhi, when he gets into a situation where help comes and he can make the pass, or like he's been really good in the pick and roll with Zubats. Those guys have like great pick and roll chemistry, but there are a lot of possessions where he's the starter of the offense and he takes like a jab step contested mid-range with 19 seconds on the shot clock. And there's no movement, there's no passing, there's no dribble drive, right? And I think that those kinds of possessions are a little more viable when you have someone else who's the starting point of the offense and you kind of feed it into him and let him have an isolation versus when we're coming down possession after possession and it's, okay, Kawhi at the elbow, Kawhi at the elbow, Kawhi at the elbow. And on nights when the other team isn't sending help, it's a lot of 19-second on the shot clock contested mid-range shots.
Yeah, I mean, I also love Kyle Lowry. One of my favorite players in the NBA. As somebody who really still enjoys and likes Chris Paul. Basically having his offshoot cousin Kyle Lowry is, liking one is probably, if you like one, you probably like the other, I would say. And that plays part of it, but I mean, I do think, as we all saw last year, Kyle Lowry, a pretty phenomenal fit with Kawhi Leonard. Marc Gasol, I think I'm a little less on, both because he's not nearly as good as Kyle Lowry is, and because I think Zubats has been so good that I think he's alleviated a lot of my concerns at center. I think there are still upgrades that can be made. Marc Gasol is still a lot better than Zubats, especially as being like a focal point of an offense to slow things down, make passes, just add a very different element offensively. And still, a brilliant, thinker and a communicator on the defensive end. But I don't know, what that trade would look like. I mean, Zoo is also, 13 years younger than Marc Gasol. He's a guy who the Clippers could have around for years and years as a backbone of these Kawhi PG teams. Marc Gasol is somebody who's already taken a pretty big step back this year from what I've seen of the Raptors. And I watched a decent amount of Raptors. I don't really analyze them like that, but he seems noticeably a step slower than he was even last year. And I just don't know about that. A Kyle Lowry trade, due to his contract, I'm not sure what that would look like, but that is something that would be very interesting to me because he is also, one of maybe only a couple other players in the entire NBA who can also bring a lot of what Patrick Beverley brings. And I think, Clippers fans and NBA fans in general kind of underrate Pat Beverley's actual basketball abilities. You can talk about the tough guy attitude and the flopping, and just like his energy and intensity, but I think it underrates what he is as a basketball player. He's been off to a slow start this year, but he's a guy who, for his career, is historically pretty solid from three, albeit on low to medium volume. He never turns the ball over ever. He doesn't make a ton of plays for others, but he doesn't make stupid mistakes with the basketball either. And on a team with Lou Williams, Kawhi Leonard, and Paul George, all of whom are high turnover guys, that's insanely valuable. And most of all, he's a really, truly ridiculously good rebounder considering his size and his lack of athleticism. And on a team that likes to go small a lot with Montrezl Harrell at center, And Paul George not a great rebounder considering his size. That rebounding is hugely important and has won the Clippers some games this year. And Kyle Lowry is one of just a couple of point guards who can do all that stuff as well. Great leader, great rebounder. Probably honestly a better defender than Patrick Beverley, I would say. A far better shooter, clearly a far better playmaker, scorer. So I think in that sense, not only would he be an upgrade, but he could also not uncover any weaknesses. Whereas I think bringing in some point guard help, those guys might be better in terms of a shot creation sense, but you lose some of the things that Patrick Beverley loses. Again, I'm not sure what the trade would be like. I don't think the Raptors should or will trade Kyle Lowry. But I think that would be an awesome trade if the Clippers could pull it off.
We should have Rob on the show more often just to gush about Kyle Lowry.
Yeah, I'm enjoying this. I was going to say, there's a part of me, Anthony, I know you've talked about this before too, but there's a part of me, everyone knows by now, Kyle Lowry is the greatest Raptor of all time. Everybody here loves him. We're in the post-championship era, NBA champion Kyle Lowry. He's the best. He does a bunch of things that don't show up in the box score, and we love him for it. But there's a part of me, and I know you said this before, Anthony, too, that wants to see Kyle Lowry, especially in the twilight of his career, on a contending team again, because he's still got it. You know what I mean? It's just this season for the Raptors has never been about winning. It's been about staying competitive, but it's not about trying to repeat for a title. That was never realistic. I'm not going to do that. And Kyle Lowry is the guy keeping them competitive, for sure, especially with all the injuries, along with Siakam and stuff. But there's a part of me that would love to see him on a Clippers, on a Philadelphia, just to see him again kind of, be able to go into that fight with a really good team around him and be the guy that, does all the dirty work and nobody really recognizes so much because of all the other flashier stuff going on, but he's there sort of running everything. There's a part of me that would love to see that.
Also for what another ring would do for his Hall of Fame case.
Sure, yeah.
I think Lowry would be amazing for the Clippers. But I actually think that while in a vacuum, Lowry is definitely better than Gasol and better than Gasol right now for sure. I think with what the Clippers need, I almost feel like Gasol makes more sense to target because Zubac has been really good, like Robert said. I've been really pleased with how Zubac has played this year. But the Clippers are looking at a situation where they might have to go through Jokic in the second round, Anthony Davis in the Western Conference Finals, and then Embiid in the finals. And I don't know that Zubac is the guy you want to roll into those three fights with. You know what I mean? And the Clippers don't have a veteran big man. The Clippers don't have that sort of defensive-minded big man that you trust. They don't have a center who can space the floor to help open up offense for Kawhi and PG. And I think that while Mark would not necessarily impact the day-to-day of the Clippers as much, I think as a guy like Lowry that was just kind of raise their level as a team, possession by possession, I think that Gasol really kind of pinpoint targets the matchups in the postseason where the Clippers are going to struggle the most and kind of patches over those holes. I think that Lowry, while, like I said, he raises the Clippers' level possession, every possession that he's on the court, they're going to be slightly better than they are with Patrick Beverley. But I think that Patrick Beverley also still does everything that the Clippers need from a point guard. And I think the issue, even if the Clippers were to go get, whether it's Lowry or someone else, a real playmaking point guard, the problem will come back to right now the Clippers point guard is standing in the opposite corner while Kawhi or PG isolates on the wing, right? So if the Clippers aren't running anything, then it doesn't really matter how good of a distributor they have at point guard because the point guard's standing in the corner. So I think, yes, getting a guy like Lowry would be amazing, and I would pull the trigger on a deal it would probably have to be Patrick Beverley and Mo Harkless. Those are the two pieces that make the money work, and then you figure it out from there. I would pull the trigger on a deal like that from the Clippers' perspective, but I also think the sort of fix to the offensive problem the Clippers have been having comes from a strategy and system standpoint, not from a personnel standpoint. And I also think that in terms of addressing their weak points for their postseason run, I think it's a defensive like a veteran big man who you trust to play defense against the star bigs that you're going to be going against and who can space the floor. That's what the Clippers most need to strengthen their championship aspirations.
I'm glad you went there because I actually wanted to bring up like playoff matchups in the Clippers because the first one that comes to mind for me is in order for them to make the NBA Finals or win a championship, you're probably going to have to go through the Lakers. And every time I think about that series, the first thought that I have is that's 7 road games for the Clippers. Does that concern you guys at all?
Not really. I don't know. I'm not sure that the crowd. I guess that doesn't. Honestly, I'm more concerned about the matchup than the LA hallway series atmosphere because the Clippers. Fortunately, the Lakers are really good at doing everything wrong. But when the Clippers play the Lakers and when Anthony Davis is playing at the 4 and they have one of their athletic centers in at the 5, the Clippers offense is just it's so much of the Clippers offense runs through first of all, that's just a good defensive team from the Lakers' perspective. When you've got Danny Green, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and either McGee or Howard in there, those are good defenders when they're engaged. There's a lot of length and size there, but without sacrificing mobility because of the athletes that LeBron and Anthony Davis are. And the Clippers, so much of their offense relies on Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell, who both really struggle playing against length. And so during the stretches in that Christmas Day game when the Lakers were big, the Clippers were just getting their shots blocked at the rim. They were not able to, have good enough ball movement penetration to actually get good shots in the paint. And when the Clippers kind of made that run at the end and then ended up taking the lead and winning, it was when the Lakers went small to close the game. And I think that if the Lakers kind of realize that's what's going on and make that adjustment and stay big against the Clippers, I think the Clippers will really struggle against the Lakers as currently constructed.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I do think, interestingly, Anthony Davis is the guy that I think Clippers fans were terrified about for a Clippers-Lakers matchup because, LeBron's still LeBron, and Raptors fans, of course, know better than anybody the terrors of LeBron James. The Clippers are better equipped to defend him than any other team in the NBA. They have Kawhi, they have Paul George. Mo Harkless is a guy who could feasibly defend LeBron. That's probably it. I think with him slowed down a little bit, I think even a guy like JaMychal Green could have some degree of success against him. But in a playoff series, it would be Kawhi, Paul George, Mo Harkless, and you really can't ask for better than that. So I think the issue is going to be Anthony Davis. But whether it's just him struggling just shooting so far or not, he's been mostly under control in those first 2 games. But the Clippers have generally put smaller guys on him, and they've been able to, send help at the right times to avoid him, feasting in the paint and then forcing him to take fadeaways and, jumpers, which is not really his game. So I think what Lucas brought up is interesting is that JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard have actually been bigger problems for the Clippers than Anthony Davis has just when they go big. How much that holds up in the playoffs where, again, Kawhi and Paul George are playing 40 minutes a game. And, the Clippers have their best lineups out there and can really space the floor like that. I'm not entirely sure. But I do think that does tie back into, the Marc Gasol element of having a really big guy out there with some offense who can score against those guys while also being able to play defense on them in the post. So I do think the Lakers, none of those guys are really that great anymore, but they're both very capable of disrupting the Clippers on both ends of the court. So I would be pretty concerned for a Lakers Clippers matchup. I don't think it's a particularly great one. I think the Lakers are a really great team. They'll be tough for just about anybody. But it is certainly, if somebody else took the Lakers out before the Clippers played them, that would be the most ideal scenario.
Well, I think that kind of speaks to what I was saying earlier, where Kyle Lowry is better than Marc Gasol, but whatever percentage chance the Clippers have of winning a series against the Lakers, trading for Kyle Lowry increases that chance, but I think trading for Marc Gasol increases that chance more, because I think it just fills that hole the Clippers have. I would say the same against like in a final series against Philadelphia going up against Embiid, right? Or in a second round series against Denver going up against Jokic, right? I think that Gasol kind of really targets those points where the Clippers most need help in big matchups.
The asking price for Gasol would also be lower than
Yeah.
Josh, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think you picked Philly to win the title, and I did as well.
I did, yeah.
And a big part of the reason for me that I picked Philly is I just think the teams that are most likely to come out of the Eastern Conference match up really well with the teams that are most likely to come out of the Western Conference.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is the size. I mean, both Philly and Milwaukee have size that I think is hard for a lot of the Western Conference contenders to deal with. And Embiid's a tough matchup, and we're lucky to have Gasol.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think. Yeah, I think I would make that move to win the title as well. And that might look a little foolish at this point, but it's still early. I still think from a matchup perspective, they're a nightmare for every other top team to deal with. And I think the same can kind of be said of the Bucks. So I think that's more just because of how good Giannis is than anything else. But yeah, I think Clippers fans have been worried about a Bucks or Sixers finals matchup basically since this team was announced. And yeah, I think the Marc Gasol trade would work there. But it's also the question of, as always, like how much is it worth trading for specific playoff matchups? Even if they seem pretty likely, you never know what's going to happen. And like maybe Marc Gasol really helps in a Lakers series, but what if the Clippers play the Houston Rockets in the second round and Kyle Lowry for that particular series maybe helps a lot more, or maybe whoever else. So I think trading for playoff matchups in particular is always tricky. I mean, I think the Marc Gasol thing, as Lucas mentioned, is good because there are so many teams for which he would be adept against. But I mean, I think that's always a very you need to walk carefully when you're trading for specific matchups.
Just to finish this one, I do think the one thing you guys haven't had the chance to experience yet that is a real joy to experience is the chance to cheer for Kawhi Leonard and his capability of being the best player on like just any playoff night, because the way he took over games in the playoffs was just different, and it's like that gives me a certain level of belief in the Clippers, is because I don't know if LeBron can do it on the same level as Kawhi anymore. I don't know if Anthony Davis has ever been able to do it on that level consistently across the series. I know Kawhi can take over a playoff series, and I think that, like, I hope you guys get the chance to enjoy that this year. That feeling of just watching him be completely inevitable.
That's why when you said about like the road games thing about to be a Lakers home game, like there's no guy you'd rather have if you're in that situation than Kawhi Leonard to be the guy that you're going into battle with, because he doesn't care about any of that stuff. Like it won't affect him at all. Like I mean, obviously, the crowd's cheering for you. Yeah, it's gonna pump you up while you're playing the game. Like he just he's never thinking of that. He just is out there playing basketball, which is cool. It's not a guy who gets rattled. It was like I've never seen the Raptors' reputation for their whole existence has been a team gets rattled and blows it every single time. And they blow it against LeBron, and they blow it against whoever. And Kawhi changed that last year. They got rattled against the Sixers. They were going to blow it and a couple times in that series. And Kawhi was the one guy who was like, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm going to keep playing, and you guys can come with me if you want to. And a couple times they almost didn't, and he obviously carried into that Game 7. Go back and rewatch it. It's a really ugly basketball game. And Kawhi really takes them home in a couple insane plays by Serge Ibaka. But that's the guy that I think when we get to the playoffs, he's going to have that same calming effect to the Clippers, and I don't see them as a team that's going to get rattled.
I just think of the finals and F it, let's get both.
Yeah, all-time requel.
So I wanted to touch on at the end here. In December, the California law about independent contractors came into effect, and obviously that affected you guys with Clippers Nation and a lot of bloggers in California. And you guys have started your own site now, 213 Nation?
213.
213 Hoops, and like, I just wanted to give you guys a chance to talk a little bit about, like, because the way that went down seemed like it was pretty crappy to me. From what I understood, you guys didn't know it was coming until the announcement was made.
Yeah. So it was done about how I've been with, or I guess I was with SB Nation since 2011. So it was done about exactly how I would expect SB Nation to do something like this, having been around for so long, which is the worst possible way. I made a joke. It's pretty remarkable that a company that's primary business is blogging about sports manages to have like so many like PR gaffes. Like you really they're not doing anything that controversial. It shouldn't be so hard, right? But yeah, so we found out on Twitter that, and then we were Clips Nation is one of, I think, like 25 blogs that were sort of closed down, and they fired about 200 people by announcing it on Twitter. And yeah, I mean, it's I think one of the problems that we had over the years, that obviously this was like the final version of it, is just the whole corporate overlord for a fan blog thing. There's a conflict there between trying to do things that are kind of fun and organic and community based, and then SB Nation wanting to do a lot of things that are traffic based, right? Like click farming. And the real the motive behind this movement, I know the California law passed, but they really didn't have to do this because of the California law, and they internally admitted that they had been already planning it for several years and are considering expanding it outside of California in the future. But the real motive here is to run the sites more cheaply than they already are, and turn them into more click farms at the expense of having local voices and fostering these communities. And that's just them trying to maximize their profit margin, right? And so what we figured we would do in light of this is start something new, something independent, where there doesn't have to be that tension between maximizing a profit margin for a corporation and then us kind of on the ground trying to foster a community. So now we kind of get to be both. So we get to own this new site. We get to pay every single person who writes for the site, which we are going to be doing from day one, which is I think it's like kind of unheard of in the sports blogging world to be paying everyone who contributes to the site from day one. But we're really fortunate, I think, to have such a strong community on Clips Nation. Our Patreon for our startup cost has been really successful, and so we're pleased with that. And I think I'm excited, and I think Robert is excited too, to have an opportunity to kind of do our own thing, and have a place that's like for Clippers fans. And everything is about kind of the community, and it's way less about this sort of click farming structure that SB Nation was focused on.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I think regarding how everything went down, I mean, I could not agree more that it really had very little to do with the law. And even if it had to do with the law, there were so many ways around it. They're instituting a bunch of part-time and full-time positions. They could have had, for example, Lucas and I join as part-time employees and then had the rest of our staff on these 35 or less posts if they so wanted. That kind of thing was never brought up to us. It was never offered to any of us.
Robert, I don't live in California, so neither of us lives in California, so 5-post cap doesn't apply to us. So we could have stayed on it. We wouldn't even have to have been part-time employees. We could have stayed on as contractors, doing everything exactly how we were doing it. But again, the law was sort of like a shield for them to shift to a business structure that they think is going to be more advantageous.
Yeah. And then as for the new site, I think we're both, like Lucas said, very excited about it. it's not quite off the ground yet, but we're still working on some of the finer details about it. And it's a new experience for us in terms of actually building a site itself. I know Lucas and I were around from the very early days of Clips Nation, but we didn't actually weren't responsible with all the little details that go into building the back end of the site, figuring out the design, how it looks, all that kind of stuff. And because of SB Nation, we never had to worry about like drawing up contracts and all those little things about how to pay people and the legal elements of things. We're working on that kind of stuff, which is about as fun as it sounds. But the writing will come. We're hoping to start February, and when that does, I think I will hopefully be able to write more about non just game by game stuff and more about big picture stuff. Now that I don't have article quotas that I need to meet. And I think, I'm going to be writing and trying to tie stuff into more outside world things than I had. SB Nation was fairly strict on, if you're going to do anything that's kind of political, you needed to clear it with them. Whether it was a statement about the Clippers potentially signing, Derrick Rose or Darren Collison. If the Clippers sign Darren Collison sometime down the stretch, I will be able to write at 213 Hoops a very strongly worded piece about how I don't believe the Clippers should be signing somebody with a domestic abuse, on their record. And I really would not have been able to do that at SB Nation, or at least not without jumping through a million hoops. And that's the kind of thing that, I want to be able to do because it's something that's like important to me. I know when the Clippers were rumored to sign Derrick Rose a couple summers ago, I was furious. And, I briefly discussed trying to write something about it, and it was just going to be a whole thing. And now, we'll want to discuss it because it would still need to be carefully worded and whatnot. But, that's the kind of freedom and, independence that I think, having our own site and our own blog will be really nice for.
Yeah, it's always been a weird dynamic to me because like the sports blogging world really at this point forms a lot of the backbone of basketball media. There's a lot of the major writers who have the big jobs. They reference bloggers on a regular basis. They look to the blogging world for information and analysis on a regular basis. And then there's this dynamic of like a lot of that is expected. I mean, it's great that you guys are able to pay everybody from day one because a lot of it is expected to be free labor in a lot of places. And it's work that kind of still needs to be done for the basketball media to exist the way it does. But it's also work that's not being compensated. And I mean, looking at what you guys are saying happened with Vox, what happened with Sports Illustrated just recently, which was kind of the same thing where they laid off a whole pile of staff and replaced people with clickbait. And you see a lot of really talented writers getting replaced with that kind of stuff. And it really sucks as somebody who loves the sports blogging world, loves what it's brought, loves to read all the great content that's out there, to also know that, like, a lot of the time the person who's writing that isn't being well enough compensated for what they're doing. And so, like, I think it's awesome that you guys are setting that as a goal, that you guys are going ahead and doing that. And I wish you guys nothing but the best. I hope you guys have a lot of success at 213 Hoops.
Thank you.
Yeah, we do appreciate that, and hopefully, we'll be able to get it off and get it running. And I think one of the things that SB Nation was able to provide was like affiliation with other sites, and having that like connection and that access to other talented bloggers and people. But once you've been around and have already made those connections, like we know both of you through Twitter, and those connections will be able to remain with or without SB Nation. And I think that's something that like bloggers, those blogs promise is like, we'll be able to connect with other people. But I think, what social media has done is opened it up, for, us to be able to record this podcast. It's not affiliated with SB Nation. We don't know you through SB Nation, but it's happening anyway. So yeah, I mean, I'm really excited, and, I'm excited to be able to continue talking basketball and talking about the Clippers and being wrong about the Clippers. So yeah.
It's cool because I feel like this is sort of more of a general statement, but there's this trend towards the bloggers, really talented people from the blogging world coming up and starting to make up a significant portion of sports media, and especially the way certain things are going, like newspapers for years, for example, have been on the down, going spiraling downwards, I suppose. But I feel like eventually those sorts of people are going to overtake sports media, and not just because it's a changing world and everybody's coming from online and stuff, but a lot of people are really smart and really good at what they do and deserve to have those platforms. A lot of people blow up on their platform because they produce good work and really intelligent. And it's great to see those people, at sporting events now. You go and you sit down at the media table and like 50% of the people there on some of those tables are bloggers, which is really neat. And it's a changing landscape, I think, because a lot of people now that I talk to, even if they're not necessarily coming specifically from a blog, they're not coming either from a specific type of sports school background. Like I went to sports. I took a 1-year post-grad program to help boost myself in the industry, for example. But like I started blogging way before, so I consider myself coming up through the blogging sphere instead. And I know a lot of people that are doing that sort of same thing and taking that path because they see others doing it. So it's kind of neat that people can continue to do that, and will hopefully be a larger part of the media zeitgeist going forward.
I think we're really, really lucky and blessed in like the Raptors blogging world to have had guys like Blake Murphy and William Liu and like those types of voices who not just came through and showed that there was a pathway to success from the blogging world, but also those guys put a lot of work into bringing up the people coming behind them too. And we're really lucky in the Raptors world to have those guys who, I wouldn't have started writing for Raptors Republic if not for Blake approaching me on Twitter and asking me if I wanted to do that. And that's, most of what I've been able to do since then has built off of that opportunity. And so I'm incredibly grateful that we have that in the Raptors world. And, I think it's great to see that organic growth happening with other teams.
It's taken like the competitive nature. I was told coming into the sports industry, and I was told this by an older sports journalist that this was a really, really hyper competitive field, which it is to a degree, but that doesn't necessarily mean an angry field or a mean field. All the people coming through, especially bloggers who have been working for free for years. You use Blake as an example. He was a blogger who worked for free for years, and now he works for The Athletic. He's great. I never would have had the opportunity to work for the Raptors without him, and other people too, but because they know what you're going through and went through it themselves, and they want to help those people and know that there's value in bringing those people forward into those certain situations. So I really hope, and I'm sure there are, I don't know the other, obviously, big bloggers and trailblazers for other teams necessarily, but I'm sure they're there. It's great, and I hope that every single team, sort of has those couple big names that kind of go in and leave a trail of breadcrumbs for the next people coming behind them. Because I think that's a good way to really, even just boost up good sports coverage. Because we need more of that.
Yeah, I think, I don't think we necessarily in the Clippers world have maybe someone who goes parallel to what Blake is for the Raptors world. But we do have probably the most significant voice covering Clippers right now is Jovan, who covers the Clippers for The Athletic. And Jovan started at True Hoop, covering Clippers for Clipper Blog at True Hoop. And he went from there to working at ESPN to then making the leap to being the beat writer for the Clippers for The Athletic. And, similarly, just in terms of he's the number one Clippers beat writer working at The Athletic, and we're a Clippers fan watch for SB Nation. He should kind of be swatting away at us like gnats, right? Little annoying. But I have a really good friendship with Jovan, and we talk about different things going on with the team, and we have what I think is a really constructive, collaborative relationship that I think even like 10 years ago would have been really hard to exist between like a fan site blogger and a newspaper beat writer. So I think that kind of shifting culture, I think it's everywhere. Yeah.
I think a lot of it goes back to sites like True Hoop and Hardwood Paroxysm and Free Darko and like those original blogs that really brought. And you know, you look at those three sites and how many people who now have major jobs in NBA media who wrote for those sites at some point. It's a significant portion of NBA media at this right now.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you guys both for coming on. I enjoyed talking about the Clippers, enjoyed talking about the sports blogging world with you guys. Wish you, the Clippers and you guys a lot of success this year, and I hope things go well with the new blog. Aside from 213 Hoops, your guys' new site, anything else you guys want to plug right now?
Well, I'm actually still writing a fair amount at Clips Nation until we get the new site ready and until, kind of our contracts run out. But I'm mostly doing just game coverage just to keep some content going for the community. So not really much to plug, I guess. Just Twitter handle is at Flom. And we do have our own podcast, The Law of the Jam of the Pod, as well as Same Old Clippers. So I'm on a couple podcasts, which post fairly regularly. So yeah, if you want to listen to some Clippers coverage that is hopefully not too biased, check those out.
Yeah, Rob said all the good stuff. That's it. That's what we got.
Hey, I'm not a Clippers guy, and I listen to The Law of the Jam of the Pod on a fairly regular basis.
Nice.
Yeah. Appreciate that.
Anything you want to plug, Josh?
Oh, nothing specific. I'm just doing the same old stuff. Sportsnet, Raptors Republic. Keep an eye out. I'll hopefully be doing some more Writers Right podcast soon at some point when I get a semblance, a sliver of more time, perhaps. But would love to bring that back and hopefully have you guys both on at some point. Would be awesome too, because you're two guys that I would love to talk to more about just writing in general too. Because I know you guys are both fantastic writers. So thanks for coming on. It's been fun talking to you guys.
Yeah, thanks.
You and I have to record the Lord of the Rings argument podcast.
Told me birthday yesterday, and I almost thought of doing it then, just so I can have that extra leverage of it's his birthday. And how dare me his birthday.
Yeah, for me, as always, I'm writing at Raptors Republic. I'm working on something that I hope is going to be coming out this week. I want to do a Raptors trade primer from the perspective of the Raptors as buyers, because I think a lot of people are presenting the sellers aspect, and I want to look at what the Raptors could do as buyers at the trade deadline. And as well, I'm always here on my Twitch channel or YouTube, wherever you're watching. I've been broadcasting a little bit of Witcher 3 on Twitch recently. Just watching the show got me back into the game, and so doing that, and that's about it for me. Thank you again to everybody watching. Thank you to you guys for coming on the pod, and everybody have a good day.